This is the last episode of 2019, but if you're black, this is the first episode since I left back in 1984. It's been a really long time. Here's actually a picture of me back when I first started.
Saturday Night Live, or SNL, is famous for entertainment, the laughs, the jokes, and just for its entire comedy. But behind the scenes, it isn't always that fun. The set can turn tense fast because of big egos from the cast, late-night stress, and the pressure from airing live. Over the years, some cast members have clashed really hard and seriously, and while the audience only knew about the hilarious sketches, no one was aware of the tensions behind the camera. Here is a list of SNL casts who, for a time, couldn't just stand their co-stars: Chevy Chase and John Belushi. The early days of Saturday Night Live were electric, raw, unpredictable, and bursting with talent. But behind the scenes, things weren't always as smooth as they looked on screen. Two of the biggest stars to come out of those early seasons were Chevy Chase and John Belushi. And while they shared the stage, they definitely didn't share a friendship. In fact, their relationship was marked by jealousy, ego, and eventually an outright fight. Chevy Chase was the first breakout star of SNL. Almost instantly, he became the face of the show with his signature line, "Live from New York, it's Saturday night," and his slick delivery of the Weekend Update segment. He was funny, tall, charming, and seemed destined for Hollywood. That meteoric rise rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, especially John Belushi. Belushi was just as talented, maybe even more versatile, but he wasn't getting the same kind of spotlight. And it burned. Belushi felt like Chevy's success came at the expense of everyone else. He thought Chase was hogging screen time, and worse, he saw him as arrogant and smug. Chase didn't help his case by being aloof and, at times, dismissive. The rest of the cast had formed a tight bond, almost like a rebellious comedy family, and Chevy started to drift away from that. Eventually, he left SNL after just one season to pursue a movie career, something that Belushi and others saw as a betrayal. That move only intensified the resentment. Things came to a head when Chase returned to host the show in 1978. Instead of a warm welcome, there was tension from the moment he walked into the studio. Chase reportedly came in with an air of superiority, and the cast, especially Belushi, weren't having it. Verbal jabs escalated throughout the week, and finally, backstage before the show, things got physical. Accounts differ on who threw the first punch, but what's certain is that fists flew. Some say Belushi had been provoking Chase with cruel jokes, while others claim Chevy made personal comments about Belushi's weight and substance use. Either way, it ended with the two men needing to be separated. The fight was the climax of years of bad blood, and it left a permanent mark on their relationship. They never really reconciled. Belushi's tragic death in 1982 cut off any chance of a truce, and over the years, Chevy has occasionally spoken about the incident, but never in a particularly apologetic tone. In the end, their feud was a reflection of the intense pressure cooker that SNL was in its early days. Young, talented comedians thrown into fame overnight, all competing for the same spotlight. It's kind of amazing how two brilliant comedians, both essential to the DNA of the show, let rivalry get the best of them. But maybe that's what made SNL so iconic back then. Passion, ego, and a little chaos all mixed together. The Chase-Belushi feud wasn't pretty, but it was definitely part of the show's wild, legendary history. Are you a fan of the show? You might have witnessed the tension between the next pair we're about to reveal. Mike Meyers and Dana Carvey. Mike Meyers and Dana Carvey were once one of comedy's most iconic duos, especially known for their unforgettable roles as Wayne and Garth in the legendary Wayne's World sketches on Saturday Night Live, and later in the feature films. Their chemistry on screen was undeniable, and they seemed like the perfect comedic match. But behind the scenes, things weren't always as smooth. The friendship between Meyers and Carvey hit a rough patch that led to a prolonged estrangement, and it all had to do with a character that would go on to become one of Meyers' most recognizable creations, Dr. Evil from the Austin Powers movies. According to Carvey, the voice and mannerisms of Dr. Evil were strikingly similar to the impression he had developed of SNL creator and executive producer Lorne Michaels, an impression Carvey had been doing for years, even during their time working together on Saturday Night Live. Carvey felt that Meyers had essentially borrowed or outright taken the impression and used it as the foundation for a major character without giving him any credit. Understandably, this caused some tension. In the world of comedy, especially sketch comedy, impressions and characters are incredibly personal, and many comedians guard them fiercely. For Carvey, seeing something so closely tied to his own comedic work being used in such a high-profile way by a close collaborator likely felt like a betrayal. The situation strained their relationship for many years, and for fans of Wayne's World, it was disappointing to learn that the hilarious duo wasn't on good terms off-screen. Fortunately, time seems to have healed some of the old wounds. In more recent years, both Meyers and Carvey have opened up about the conflict in interviews, and it seems they've moved toward reconciliation. They've even reunited publicly, showing fans glimpses of the camaraderie that made them such a great team in the first place. Still, the whole episode serves as a reminder that even the funniest partnerships can have complicated and very human moments behind the scenes. What happened to them beyond SNL? After Saturday Night Live, Mike Meyers and Dana Carvey took different career paths, but both carried the legacy of their success on the show, especially through their unforgettable Wayne's World sketches. Mike Meyers quickly launched into a string of major film projects, starting with the Wayne's World movies in the early 90s, which became cult classics and proved that SNL characters could carry full-length comedies. His biggest breakthrough came with the Austin Powers trilogy, where he not only starred, but created multiple hilarious characters like Dr. Evil, Fat Bastard, and Austin himself. These movies were massive hits and cemented Meyers as one of the most original comedic minds of his era. Then came Shrek, where he voiced the grumpy but lovable ogre in what became one of the most successful animated franchises of all time. Meyers seemed to thrive creatively when he could play with characters, voices, and parody, and Hollywood gave him the space to do just that. Dana Carvey, meanwhile, had a slightly quieter career after SNL. He starred in a few movies like Clean Slate and The Master of Disguise, but they didn't achieve the same kind of success as Meyers' films. Carvey was widely respected for his impressions and comedic timing. He was considered one of the most talented SNL cast members in that regard. But he didn't seem to chase stardom in the same way. Part of the reason was personal. He stepped back from Hollywood for a while to focus on his family, especially after his young son had serious health issues. Despite being less visible in the mainstream spotlight, Carvey continued doing stand-up comedy and occasional TV appearances, and he always had a loyal fan base who appreciated his SNL-era brilliance. There was also a period where fans speculated that Meyers and Carvey had a falling out. Carvey later admitted that there was some tension, mostly related to feeling like Meyers had borrowed elements of his Dr. Evil impression from Carvey's take on Lorne Michaels, SNL's creator. But over time, they reconnected, and any awkwardness between them seems to have faded. In the 2020s, they've appeared together on podcasts like Fly on the Wall, which Carvey co-hosts with David Spade, and have done interviews reminiscing about their SNL days. They even reunited to do a Super Bowl commercial as Wayne and Garth, proving their chemistry is still alive, and that their characters remain beloved. Sarcasm isn't always taken well, even from expert comedians. Let's see how an off comment ruined a duo: Eddie Murphy and David Spade. Back in 1995, there was a pretty memorable clash between two big names in comedy: Eddie Murphy and David Spade. It all started on Saturday Night Live, during the Weekend Update segment, when David Spade took a jab at Murphy that didn't land well at all. Spade was doing his usual bit where he comments on celebrities, and at one point, he showed a picture of Eddie Murphy and said, "Look, children, a falling star. Make a wish." Now, it might have seemed like just another sarcastic line in the moment, but the impact was anything but light. Eddie Murphy, who had once been one of SNL's biggest breakout stars in the early 80s, took serious offense to the joke. He felt that it was not just a dig at his career, but something deeper, possibly racially loaded. In his eyes, the joke wasn't just about a slump in box office numbers, it felt like a personal attack. And he was especially hurt that it came from a show he had helped put on the map. Murphy had a right to be upset too. At the time, he was going through a rough patch professionally, but he was still Eddie Murphy. His legacy and contributions to comedy, and to SNL in particular, were huge. The fallout from that moment was pretty intense. Murphy reportedly called Spade and let him have it, letting out years of frustration, not just at that joke, but at what he felt was a broader lack of respect. He later explained in interviews that the joke felt like a betrayal, especially since he had always tried to be loyal to SNL, even after his departure. Spade, for his part, has said he didn't mean to hurt Murphy, and that it was just another joke in a long string of celebrity roasts. But Murphy wasn't buying that explanation at the time. For years, the two didn't speak, and it became one of those behind-the-scenes Hollywood stories that kept popping up in conversations about showbiz beefs. Eventually, though, things cooled down. Murphy and Spade managed to patch things up, and they're apparently on good terms now. But that moment still stands out as a reminder that even comedians, whose job is to make people laugh, can sometimes cross a line, intentionally or not. And when the punchline hits a nerve, especially with someone who's already given so much to the comedy world, the fallout can be serious. Eddie Murphy's contribution to Saturday Night Live in the 80s had been crucial to its survival. At a time when the show was struggling with ratings and losing major talent, Murphy's charisma and innovative comedic presence revitalized the program. Characters like Buckwheat, Mr. Robinson, and Gumby became cultural touchstones. Given that legacy, Murphy felt deeply betrayed by the jab from Spade and, by extension, the show. He described the incident as a cheap shot and admitted that it hurt him emotionally and professionally. He viewed it as an unnecessary slight that undermined his contributions to SNL's legacy. The fallout from the incident was significant. Murphy distanced himself from SNL for many years and chose not to participate in various reunion events or retrospectives. According to Spade, Murphy even called him directly after the episode aired to voice his displeasure, making it clear that he was not amused by the joke and that the relationship between them had been damaged. For Spade, it was a difficult position to be in, as the joke was written in the spirit of the segment's humor, but he came to understand the depth of Murphy's hurt over time. It wasn't until 2015 that Eddie Murphy made a return to the SNL stage, appearing at the show's 40th anniversary special. Though he avoided any sketches or comedy bits during the broadcast, his presence alone marked a significant moment of reconciliation with the show's legacy. Behind the scenes, both Murphy and Spade began to put the past behind them. As more time passed, their interactions became more cordial, and the sharp edges of their conflict seemed to soften. By the time the SNL 50th anniversary special aired in 2025, it was clear that the rift had healed. Both Murphy and Spade were present for the event, and by all accounts, their interactions were warm and free of tension. David Spade publicly acknowledged that there were no weird vibes between them, and Murphy echoed that sentiment, describing their exchange as friendly and relaxed. Norm Macdonald and Chris Katan. One lesser-known feud that quietly simmered during the late 90s was between Norm Macdonald and Chris Katan. These two comedians couldn't have been more different, and their mutual dislike became a bit of an open secret among people close to the show. Norm Macdonald had a very particular brand of comedy: dry, sarcastic, cerebral, and often kind of dark. He wasn't afraid to bomb with a joke if he thought it was clever, and that fearless approach earned him a cult following, especially for his time behind the Weekend Update desk. Norm liked his comedy smart and subtle, and he didn't hide the fact that he thought certain types of humor were just beneath him. Unfortunately for Chris Katan, that seemed to include most of what he did. Chris Katan, on the other hand, was all about physical comedy and high energy. His characters, like Mango, Mr. Peepers, and Azrael Abyss, were loud, wild, and totally over the top. Audiences loved him, but for someone like Norm, Katan's style seemed too silly or exaggerated. At some point, Norm started making it pretty clear, both on and off camera, that he wasn't a fan. He reportedly called Katan's sketches hacky and dismissed them as cheap laughs, which obviously didn't sit well with Katan. The friction between them wasn't just about artistic differences, though. It also seemed personal. Norm had a way of throwing shade that was both subtle and brutal, and Katan, being more sensitive and high-strung, didn't take kindly to it. While there were no major public fights, the tension was felt on set. They were professional enough to work together when needed, but you could tell there wasn't any love lost between them. Even years later, after they'd both moved on from SNL, there didn't seem to be much reconciliation. When Norm Macdonald passed away in 2021, comedians from all over the world, famous or not, paid tribute to his genius. Katan's silence was noticeable, and it kind of spoke volumes. Maybe he didn't want to fake something he didn't feel, or maybe the memories were still a little too raw. Either way, it was a quiet reminder that not everyone from SNL ends up as lifelong friends. Pete Davidson and Louis C.K., the whole Pete Davidson and Louis C.K. thing, yeah, that got pretty messy. It all started when Pete accused Louis of trying to get him kicked off Saturday Night Live. The reason? Pete was smoking weed, something pretty normal in today's world, especially in creative circles, but apparently Louis was not having it at all. According to Pete, Louis went directly to Lorne Michaels, the SNL boss, and basically ratted him out. Imagine working on one of the biggest comedy shows on TV, and suddenly your boss hears you're smoking pot because one of the senior comedians decided to play the tattletale. That's some serious backstage tension right there. Now, Louis C.K. is kind of a comedy royalty. He's been around forever, has a huge reputation, and is known for his sharp, sometimes controversial humor. But he's also had his share of scandals and controversies himself, which makes the whole situation with Pete even more interesting. You'd think someone who's been through so much would be a bit more chill, or at least focused on bigger issues than policing a young cast member's marijuana use. But nope, Louis apparently didn't like it at all, and thought it was serious enough to take it straight to Lorne Michaels. That's the kind of move that's going to cause some serious waves behind the scenes. Pete, on the other hand, is one of those newer, younger faces of comedy. He's laid back, open about his lifestyle, and doesn't shy away from sharing his personal struggles or quirks with the public. Smoking weed is just part of his vibe, and it's not something he'd expect to cause him trouble at work. So when he found out Lewis had basically tried to get him fired, it didn't sit well with him. Pete went public with the accusation, which took the drama from backstage whispers to full-on public feud. Fans were divided. Some saw Pete as the underdog being unfairly targeted by an old-school comic, while others thought Pete might be stirring up drama for attention. Either way, it made the workplace conflict very visible and uncomfortable. This isn't just about weed or tattling. It's about a clash of generations and work cultures. Pete represents the newer wave of comedians who blend personal life and comedy with a more relaxed, sometimes rebellious attitude. Lewis is from an older generation that often values a certain professionalism and probably expects cast members to toe the line in ways Pete doesn't. When these two styles collide, especially in a high-pressure environment like SNL, it's almost guaranteed to cause conflict. And since both guys are pretty outspoken and have big personalities, it's no surprise things blew up. On camera, it's all jokes and laughs. But backstage, there are egos, rules, and all kinds of personal issues that can make things tense. Pete's accusation showed just how real and raw those tensions can get. It also sparked conversations about what kind of behavior is acceptable and who gets to enforce the rules. Is Lewis justified in stepping in because he thinks Pete's behavior could hurt the show's reputation? Or is Pete right that Lewis was overstepping and acting like a snitch? There's no clear answer, but it definitely made people pay attention. On to the next clash, and you should not miss this. Bowen Yang and DaveChapelle. Back in 2022, during one of DaveChapelle's hosting gigs, something pretty noticeable happened involving Bowen Yang. You might remember Bowen from Saturday Night Live. He's one of the breakout stars on the cast, and also openly queer and trans-aware. So, during the usual post-show goodnights, when everyone typically shares hugs or pats on the back, Bowen seemed to kind of pull away or distance himself from Chappelle. It wasn't super dramatic or anything, but if you were watching closely, it definitely caught some people's attention. Now, this small moment actually ended up being a pretty big deal for a lot of folks, because it felt like a silent statement. See, Chappelle had made some pretty controversial and hurtful comments about the trans community in his previous specials and public appearances. Those remarks didn't just fly under the radar, they sparked a lot of backlash and conversations about transphobia in comedy, especially within the SNL cast, since they all work together and share a stage. Bowen, being someone who openly represents LGBTQ+ voices, was seen by many as responding to those comments, even if it was just with body language and subtle distancing. It wasn't just about that one moment either. It highlighted ongoing tensions behind the scenes. There was this underlying sense that some cast members, especially those from marginalized communities, were uncomfortable or even upset about Chappelle's views. The fact that Bowen's small gesture during a seemingly casual goodbye made waves showed how sensitive and charged the atmosphere was. People wanted to see solidarity and support for the trans community. And Bowen's reaction felt like a quiet pushback against Chappelle's more controversial takes. That brief distancing during the post-show goodnights wasn't just awkward TV. It was a snapshot of bigger issues playing out behind the scenes. It showed how comedy isn't just about jokes and laughs. Sometimes it's about real feelings, identities, and how people choose to stand up, or not, when faced with divisive opinions. Bowen's moment said a lot, without him having to say anything at all. After gaining momentum on SNL, Bowen started branching out. He took his talents to other shows like Awkwafina is Nora from Queens, and lent his voice to projects like The Simpsons and The Animated Z-Way. But what's really remarkable is how Bowen has carved out a space as a pop culture figure in his own right. He's active on social media, co-hosts the podcast Las Culturistas with Matt Rogers, a hit among comedy and entertainment lovers, and has become a voice of LGBTQ+ visibility in entertainment. More than just sketches and bits, Bowen is building a career on being unapologetically himself. He's open about his struggles with mental health, his identity, and navigating the entertainment industry as a queer Asian man. He's done interviews that go deep, using his platform for more than just laughs, though of course, he's still incredibly funny. His trajectory post-SNL seems like it's only going up, not just in TV and film, but also as a cultural critic and personality who can hold court on red carpets and in serious discussions alike. Now, DaveChapelle's post-SNL career is a whole different story, partly because his SNL involvement was never as central. Chappelle was a guest host, not a full-time cast member, but his appearances, especially after his return to the spotlight in the 2010s, made huge waves. When Chappelle hosted the show right after the 2016 election, it felt like the whole country was waiting to hear what he had to say. He delivered a monologue that was part stand-up, part sermon, part cultural reckoning. And that's kind of where Chappelle has lived ever since, right at the intersection of comedy and controversy. After walking away from Chappelle's show in the mid-2000s, Chappelle spent years off the radar, performing in smaller clubs and figuring out what comedy meant to him. Then came the Netflix specials, the sold-out shows, and a massive return to public consciousness. His stand-up became more political, more philosophical, and definitely more divisive. Some praised him for his raw honesty and his unwillingness to play it safe. Others criticized him for punching down, particularly when it came to jokes about the LGBTQ+ community. The tension around his material hasn't slowed him down much, though. Chappelle continues to draw huge crowds, win awards, including multiple Emmys, and spark intense debates. What's interesting is how he's leaned into being a provocateur. He's made it clear he's not trying to be universally liked, and that's part of his brand now, saying the unsayable, challenging cancel culture and reflecting on race, class, and free speech in America. Whether you agree with him or not, Chappelle has turned his post-SNL career into something almost mythic. The veteran comic who doesn't care about pleasing the internet, who tours on his own terms, and who keeps redefining what it means to be a comedian in a time when every joke is scrutinized. SNL's success, despite its challenges. For almost 50 years, this iconic sketch comedy show has been a launching pad for some of the biggest names in comedy and entertainment. From Eddie Murphy and Tina Fey to Bill Hader and Kate McKinnon, SNL has given us countless unforgettable performances, characters, and catchphrases. But what's really remarkable is that it has survived and even thrived, despite facing serious challenges almost every step of the way. Whether it's changing audience tastes, the rise of the internet, or controversies both behind and in front of the camera, SNL just keeps going. Somehow, it always finds a way to stay relevant, and that's part of what makes its success so impressive. One of the biggest challenges SNL has had to deal with over the years is its constantly rotating cast. Unlike sitcoms or dramas that have a steady ensemble, SNL works more like a sports team. Players come and go. Some leave after just a couple of seasons, and others stick around for a decade or more. Every time a beloved cast member leaves, people wonder if the show can survive. When legends like Will Ferrell or Kristen Wiig moved on, there was a collective sense of panic. How could the show possibly go on without them? But somehow, it always bounces back. That's partly thanks to the show's ability to spot new talent and give them the freedom to shine. It's not always a smooth transition, and not every new cast member is a hit. But over time, SNL tends to find its footing again. Another thing that makes SNL's success remarkable is how it has stayed relevant in a changing media landscape. When it first premiered in 1975, there were only a few major TV channels. Everyone was watching the same shows, and live television had a special kind of power. Today, things are totally different. People can stream whatever they want, whenever they want. Comedy lives on TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter. Attention spans are shorter, and people expect faster laughs. In this environment, a 90-minute live show that airs once a week could easily seem outdated. And yet, SNL still manages to grab headlines. Its sketches go viral. Its political parodies shape public conversation. And it remains a go-to platform for celebrities and musicians alike. That's no small feat. Of course, SNL has had its fair share of missteps and controversies. Over the years, it's been criticized for lacking diversity, recycling stale ideas, and occasionally crossing the line into poor taste. Some seasons have been stronger than others, and there have definitely been periods where fans and critics agreed that the show had lost its spark. But what's interesting is that SNL seems to embrace its imperfections. The fact that it's live means things can and do go wrong. Actors break character, jokes fall flat, and scenes sometimes spiral into chaos. But that unpredictability is part of the charm. The show doesn't pretend to be perfect, and that authenticity keeps people coming back. In a way, the mistakes make it more real. Behind the scenes, SNL's creator and longtime producer Lorne Michaels deserves a lot of credit for steering the ship through good times and bad. He's been with the show almost since day one, and his ability to adapt, while still holding on to the core of what makes SNL unique, is a big part of its longevity. Lorne has an eye for talent and a sense of when to evolve and when to stick to tradition. Even as he steps back and eventually passes the torch, his influence will be felt for years to come. Thanks for watching until the end. Subscribe for more content like this.